Good morning, good afternoon, welcome, whatever time zone you're in. My name is Charlie McCann. I am delighted to be moderating this panel discussion on behalf of The Economist, where I am a correspondent. My patch is Southeast Asia, part of the world that is particularly ravaged by climate change. We're experiencing more storms of greater severity, more frequency. When the rain's not pelting down, it's just getting hotter. Climate change is, of course, a problem that is besetting the entire planet from Australia to the US. And I think it's clear that when it comes to promoting sustainability, there is a role for policymakers, activists, and business people. But I think the question we're going to try and address here today is what can artists, designers, and figures from within the realm of culture do? So I am delighted today to be joined by three individuals. We have, first of all, Daan Roosegaarde, the designer and founder of Studio Roosegaarde. Welcome. We have Matteo Mastandrea, who is a designer at Sdevlin Studio in London and also a tutor in architecture at the Royal College of Art. And we also have Ed Winters, who is a vegan educator, speaker, and the founder of, and the founder of Surge, an animal rights organization. So one of the cities that I spend a lot of time covering is Jakarta, which is the capital of Indonesia. It's a tremendously exciting, dynamic place, but it's also kind of tragic. It's several feet below sea level. It is sinking. The seas are rising. And that is also a problem being faced by the Netherlands. It is several feet below sea level. The seas are rising. And that is the subject of a recent installation by Daan called Waterlit. So Dan, can you tell us a bit about this project and what you were trying to do with it?
Yeah, of course. Yeah. Hey, good afternoon, good evening. Yeah, I think the Netherlands is in exactly the opposite situation as Abu Dhabi, because we live below sea level. And my Chinese friends or my Asian friends, when they visit me, they are like, that is really weird. Who fights the water? Just move to the hills, move to a higher ground. But we don't. And for more than 1,000 years, the Dutch have created this ingenious system of windmills, dams, dikes, management to create our own home. So we've been fighting with nature, right? But we've also been learning from nature and living with nature. And I think if you zoom out and look at our future world, our future cities, our future environments, we are in need of a similar harmony, of a similar symbiotic relationship. So we need to be creative, we need to reinvent, and I am very interested in finding that relationship. So the installation Waterlicht you're referring to is literally showing with a combination of LEDs and lenses how high the water level would be if we stop investing in new ideas, stop caring. And so we started the flood in a virtual with light squares, public squares in Amsterdam, London, New York, Toronto, in Dubai. And it's a bit scary that you're like, is this our future world? But at the same time, it's also activating and wondering, should we build floating cities? Can we generate energy from the changing in tide? So my role as an artist, as a designer, is to activate people and hopefully make them curious about the future, not just sad.
Yeah, unfortunately, I haven't seen it in person, but I've seen videos of it, and it has a really spooky effect. It almost is sort of unworldly, unearthly in this kind of funny way. I understand,
yeah, absolutely, yeah.
I understand that your mantra is, and I'm going to butcher the Dutch, so please forgive me, is schoonheid?
Schoonheid, yeah.
Schoonheid,
Schoonheid,
which is
yeah.
A word that has a double meaning. It means both beauty and clean. Can you explain what that word means to you?
Yeah. So it, in a way, schoonheid means beauty, creativity, creative thinking. I think our future human values, as the machines are taking over a lot of our jobs, the taxi driver, the garbage collection, the accountant, our human skills of creativity and thinking and learning, why are we here, are becoming important. But it also means clarity, clean air, clean water, clean energy, clean space. And for me, these are our future values. This is true beauty, not an expensive car or an expensive watch. And so when you think about UAE and Abu Dhabi and the Dubai development and the new cities, I think that should be in the DNA of any kind of decision they're making, either design a car or a city or food or a road. It needs to have, those future values of clarity, creativity, and cleanness within itself. Otherwise, it won't be future proof. And the things that we are designing here in Rotterdam in the Netherlands are sort of prototypes showing the beauty of that world, step by step improving.
I think that the idea of the beauty, creativity, the cleanliness really informs your latest work, Urban Sun. I've seen the pictures, and I think it consists of a sort of orb of light which showers the person standing underneath it. But there's a twist, and I'll let you explain that.
Yeah. I love how you describe it. I can tell you're a good journalist. You're already, just by describing it, it triggers the imagination. Yeah. So sometimes we get commissions by a government, a minister, or a mayor, or a museum. And sometimes we ask ourselves a question, right? That's important as well, to activate your own ideas. And so Urban Sun was initiated 14 months ago when I was reading a science article in journal in Nature about this very specific far UVC light, 222 nanometer, which is not harmful for people and animals, but can still kill viruses. And as we know now, including coronavirus. So that's interesting. The power of light can help us. And so indeed, 3 days ago, we launched Urban Sun, a sphere with that specific light wavelength, which cleans spaces from coronavirus in minutes, really fast speed of light, 300,000 kilometers per second. So it's an extra solution, an extra barrier, an extra help to make places which are safer to meet. It's of course always in meeting with the existing government rules, so it's not instead of vaccine or things like that. But I think it's so important that we use design, we use science to create places which are good for us. We're trapped in this Zoom call, and I think we need to design a new world. So this project has been launched. It's backed by scientists. It has support of the Dutch Health Council. It meets the international standards of safety. And we can't wait to bring that to places like Dubai, where a lot of people are gathering, to show, how we can design our new normal. We should be the architects of our new normal. That's what I believe.
This is a super exciting project. I mean, could we see a future where the Urban Sun is rolled out in cities across the world? I mean, is that
Yeah, we're ready. We spent 14 months showing it can be done and it's feasible. And it's interesting, I don't know how you experience it, when you do innovation in any kind of project I've done in the last 12 years, in the beginning, there are always people asking, is it possible? Is it allowed? But once you finally launched it and shared it, people ask, that's a great idea. Why haven't you done it before? So innovation is also about getting used to new ideas. But yes, Urban Sun is scalable. We can make a really large one where the light is sanitizing all the air, all the particles, all the surfaces in a short time. So for example, Expo Dubai or certain schoolyards or Burning Man, or you name it, these social gatherings. It's really important that we find new ways to meet again and exchange and learn from each other. And Urban Sun is a part of that journey, but it's also the thinking, the creative thinking. My students tell me they feel their future is frozen. And I think that's a really sad feeling, right? And we shouldn't accept that. And what I love about the UAE and Abu Dhabi and is that, they embraced that feeling. They said, we're going to build a city in the desert. And we're going to do it. And we're going to do it with the best intention and the best technology and the best people we possibly can imagine. And I feel connected with that kind of radical thinking, and especially in a time like this, yeah, that's what's needed again. We need to be creative again, even more. Yeah.
Matteo, the Sdevlin Studio is perhaps best known for designing the closing ceremony for the London 2012 Olympics, and also for designing sets for the likes of U2, Kanye West. I think people are less familiar with work coming out of the studio that kind of embraces sustainability. So can you tell us a little bit about those more recent projects that are kind of grappling with that theme?
Sure, yeah. And I think over the past kind of 5 or 6 years, I'd say, the studio has really been trying to sort of acknowledge, I suppose, the struggle and difficulty with the whole process and exercise of set design. I mean, set design is a transitory exercise. You know, you design something, it's fabricated, it's then up for a matter of months, and then it's taken down, and invariably it's, you know, it just goes to waste. So there's this kind of, you know, there's this kind of kernel or fundamental kind of problem with the processes that have been in place for the last however many years. And I think we've wanted to sort of create a body of work, or start to develop a body of work that is kind of critical and reflective on that, and starts to try and sort of understand how not only the process could be better, but you know, in a kind of quantifiable sense, by using particular materials, or using materials in ways that could be reused or have a legacy mode, but also that sort of speak specifically about the issues about sustainability. So I think you know, what these newer pieces of work sort of do is, on the one hand, sort of tackle ideas around sustainability from a quantifiable kind of approach to do with materiality and how we can be better in the process, but also qualitatively about how we can really start to kind of involve people in a discussion about, you know, what sustainability might mean, what sustainability might mean in different parts of the world, and also to kind of help sort of articulate the problems, I suppose, in a really fundamental way.
Could you provide a few examples?
Sure, yeah. So a recent art piece that the studio completed at Pitshanger Art Gallery called Memory Palace was a big kind of sculptural, single sculptural model city that was sort of an assemblage, almost like a collage city of parts of the world where sort of paradigmatic or perspective shifting sort of moments of thought had occurred, and so it became a sort of landscape and a subjective landscape that, you know, that Ed had put together and fully acknowledged as her sort of own worldview, but it was a landscape that kind of encouraged spectators to sort of really question the stories that they tell themselves about the development of thought, but also how, you know, the development in thinking necessary to tackle issues around the climate is commensurate. You know, we really need to start thinking in ways that are sort of fundamentally different from perhaps the status quo. So it really was a kind of exercise in sort of acknowledging or declaring that this map was the product of a particular kind of, you know, way of seeing the world, but that everyone to some extent sort of carries these almost psychogeographic maps around with them, and conceptual maps about, you know, what's important and how we can kind of embrace that to really articulate to people what's necessary to deal with the climate crisis. But then alongside that, the whole thing was made using sort of sustainably sourced bamboo, which, you know, it was a digital process. The whole thing was modeled using CNC cutting technology, but yeah, you know, typically we would have used unthinkingly, you know, a sort of chemi-wood or a high density fiberboard. But actually, you know, we wanted to sort of tell a story as well about how, although there were compromises that were made there to do with sort of level of detail and finishes, actually the fundamental priority was to sort of use materials that that at least acknowledged that there was a discussion to be had about ethically sourcing things.
Ed, changing paradigms is precisely what you're trying to do. You're trying to get people to reconsider their attachment to meat and animal products. Can you tell us a little bit about when and why you became a vegan?
Yeah, so I've been vegan now 6 years. It's flown by. I can't really believe it. But, you know, obviously for the majority of us, the vast majority of us, we've been raised in cultures and societies where these habits of how we eat and how we live are so ingrained that we never really question them. And we never really reflect on the damage they cause to us as individuals, to the planet, and indeed, of course, to the animals as well. And I kind of went through life never really thinking about it. I always thought vegetarians were kind of these weird people, to be honest. I used to laugh about them. My family and I used to make jokes about them all the time. And then one day I was sat at the computer just looking at the news, as I often do. And I came across this story that was talking about a truck that crashed on the way to a slaughterhouse near the city of Manchester here in England, where I am. And I was reading the story and just feeling really guilty for these chickens, which is something I never thought I would think, guilt for chickens. Why would I ever care? But I felt sorry for them because the journalist had said that hundreds were dead. There were hundreds more that were suffering. And I'd never considered that animals suffer. I mean, I knew dogs and cats suffered, and of course felt bad when I watched nature documentaries and saw lions killing gazelles and such. But I never really considered that the animals I consumed could suffer. But in my fridge was a KFC because I was a huge KFC fan. And I was thinking, wow, okay, so this is a realization that's really making me feel a little bit strange here, because on the one hand, I said, I care about animals. I care about the planet. I care about my responsibility to create a more egalitarian and more compassionate society. And yet, on the other hand, I was paying for animals to be killed needlessly, and as a consequence of that, contributing to one of the most environmentally destructive industries that exists on the planet. So I kind of had to give myself a real, talking to, and I decided to go vegetarian at that point. And then about 8 months or so later, I saw a documentary called Earthlings, which talks about all the different ways that animals are used. So food, meat, dairy, and eggs, but also clothing as well, which is such a huge part of our lifestyles, and indeed entertainment as well. And afterwards, I was forced to reflect again and recognize that meat isn't just the only problem related to what we do to animals. And I had a pet hamster at the time called Rupert, who I thought was the most amazing little bundle of joy ever. And I was looking at Rupert after watching this very harrowing documentary. It's not pleasant. And I was looking at Rupert and thinking about his likes and dislikes. He loved broccoli, for instance. He loved it, but he didn't like kale, which I also found super relatable because I love broccoli, but I don't like kale so much. But I was looking at him thinking about these likes and dislikes, and I recognized he had a personality, which was so obvious, of course. But then I thought about all the other animals who had likes, dislikes, who could suffer, who had personalities, and what I was paying for them to go through. And I realized that wasn't something that sat with my morals or values. And that's why I changed. And that was, just over 6 years ago now.
Well, I can totally relate to your dislike of kale. Never gotten the enthusiasm for it myself.
I just put it in smoothies and pretend it's not there.
Right, yeah. Ed, when it comes to sustainability, right, you don't merely talk the talk, you walk the walk, right? I mean, you live as you're encouraging others to live. I wonder when it comes to your worlds, Matteo and Dan, is that a precondition for promoting sustainability within your own work? Do you think that you need to be the change you see in the world? Can you promote sustainability if you don't practice it yourself?
I mean, I think it's an ambition that everybody should have. I think everyone, it's their civic duty and responsibility to be as aware and as informed and to strive for best practice, essentially. But I think it's also, this is something that we grappled with consistently over the last few years in the studio. It's also important, I think, that that focusing on those sort of individual decisions don't detract or take away from a conversation around sort of systemic changes that are necessary to really deal with climate justice. So I think that on the one hand, these are all things that we should be doing, and I think people's individual decisions are incredibly important, not just to the change that it sort of practically makes, but also the sense of meaning that they have with the environment and their ability to contribute towards this problem. But I think I'm always quite cautious when conversation is geared towards individuals and the public, because I think it's it externalizes the responsibility to some extent that some big kind of corporations perhaps need to manage, and governments.
Yeah, I know, and I can relate to what Ed was saying. If we cannot imagine a better future, we will also not be able to create it, right? So what Ed just did is he focused on the point on the future and then started to reimagine, okay, but what does that mean for my life and my impact? I miss that in the world of today. In the 60s and the 70s, we were curious about the future. We would go to the moon, we would fly the Concorde, we had the Jetsons cartoons, and And somehow when I read the paper today, I don't know about you guys, but it feels like we're sort of sad or idle or confused, or we don't really talk about the future. And that's a big problem, because again, if we can't imagine the better world, we won't be able to create it and impactful change it. So I think what we all have in common in this conversation with the four of us is to trigger that curiosity, each in its own individual way. But you're right, it should be systematic and it should be impactful as a collective, but the personal impact can activate that.
I'd just like to say quickly that I absolutely agree with both those points. I think this the issues that we face are multifaceted, and they require, a variation of different responses, and individual change and responsibility is part of that. But we also shouldn't neglect the larger systemic changes that are needed. And unfortunately, we have a huge amount of power as individuals, and we should never doubt that. But we also are somewhat reliant on influencing those in positions of real authority and power within the government and within these corporations. And so it's definitely something we need to look at in a multitude of different ways, and hold ourselves responsible, but also make sure that we're not detracting from the impact that these corporations, who are ultimately dictating so much of our society, the power they have and responsibility that resides over them as well.
So much of what you all do is in part about raising awareness, but also it's about trying to nudge people in the right direction, to drive them to change behavior. I wonder how you think about how best to go about nudging people in that direction.
Yeah. Well, I can comment on that if you guys don't mind. Well, it's very simple. People change out of fear or out of love, right? Out of fear or out of curiosity. That triggers change. Very simple. So let's talk about the last one, because I think that's more positive. I think the way I see it, and as the Devlin Studio is, I think, also part of that, is when you can show the beauty of sustainability, when you can show the beauty of a green world, or when you show the beauty of a vegan world or a vegetarian world, it's a real trigger for people to say, hey, we want to be part of that, right? So beauty, design, and art can be an activator to accept change and to allow change to happen. And that's at least the reason why I am waking up every early morning to make that happen. So it's not a utopia, a perfect world we will never reach. It's a prototype, step by step, showing what can be done, and hopefully people embrace it and multiply it and make it grow.
Yeah, I was thinking. Sorry, go on, Charlie.
No, I was going to say it's so much more effective when you dangle something that people want in front of them, rather than give them the carrot, not the stick. People tend to respond so much more constructively, positively, to that kind of motivation, that kind of intent.
Yeah, I think it's also it's a great point. I think it's also about empowerment as well. And I think we live in a society where we often feel quite disenfranchised, and we feel that maybe we don't have as much influence as perhaps we do. And I think part of what so many people are doing now in the sustainability sphere, and of course these different cultural sectors, is it's about empowering the individual and empowering people to recognize the influence that they do have, whether that's influencing systemic change or influencing just people within their lives to think differently about that. And I think that's something that's really become apparent in the past couple of years, especially within the younger generations, who it's very easy to slip into this nihilistic, apathetic mindset of thinking that, all the science is saying this, or the governments aren't doing this. And it feels very much like a defeatist attitude. But I think what we're seeing as a result of that is almost this kind of very beautiful movement of people who are recognizing that, okay, there's something I have to do here, because I can't rely, on others to do this. I have to be the beacon of change. And so I think that empowerment aspect of what we all do with sustainability and such is really important, about creating a sense of belief. And as we were just saying, that long-term vision, like, what world do we want to live in? I mean, to me, that's what I find quite exciting about agriculture and food. Is, on the one hand, the prospect of what could happen is quite frightening. Topsoil erosion, lack of fertility in soils is a terrifying prospect. But I think that what's out there in terms of agricultural prospects is so exciting, whether it's, just plant-based meats, which are great, or cell cultured meat, which is so exciting, or for me personally, vertical farming, which I think is just the potential that vertical farming has, the hydroponic system, the sustainability aspect, the yield of food we can produce. I think that to me is so exciting. I can't wait to be in a world where these are realities that exist, as the norm rather than as something that we look towards. And so I think that empowerment, but as we've already said, that excitement for what's to come, that is one of the things that gets me up, definitely.
And this is one of the things that you guys operating in your world of the arts and culture can really do, that people in the world of business and politics struggle with, right? You guys are able to encourage people to re-examine old assumptions, to create new kind of cultural values, to respond to the prospect of a frightening future with hope. Something that's come up in my conversation with you, Matteo, is the idea of constraint, which is in itself not a particularly appealing idea for a culture that is predicated on excess consumption, right? But I wonder if you can talk about this idea of constraint, which you think that we ought to be celebrating.
Yeah, well, I think it relates to the point I made at the beginning about reuse potentially, or at least trying to kind of understand how we can kind of revivify the things around us that are already to hand. I think part of the conversation around the environment is, of course, to do with sustainability and how we can kind of live, and develop more sustainably. But I also think, we also have to acknowledge that there is a process that we're all going to have to go through as a planet, which is more about adaptation, about, in a sense, the kind of climatic changes that are already going to occur, even if we get to net zero by whatever 2030, 2050, whenever these dates are set. So I think that the kind of the core of such an observation is that we kind of need to reframe, I think, how we consider things like scarcity and constraints, and we need to see these as kind of cultural and design opportunities. I think really working within clear parameters and setting ourselves as a discipline or as an industry clearly defined targets around what's acceptable. And I think in the architectural world, you're seeing this increasingly, discussions around embodied carbon and construction techniques. There isn't much legislation in place at the moment, but there needs to be. This is stuff that, in a sense, we've known for a while, but it's been left up to various individuals and industries to kind of self-organize and raise awareness. And I think now increasingly what you're seeing is, legislation being brought in, governmental initiatives to try and basically say, that's not going to be acceptable now. And I think we shouldn't, as designers, as cultural, actors, shouldn't be sort of responding, slightly behind the curve, I think, to legislation. I think we need to sort of start to set an agenda around, an aesthetics of scarcity, an aesthetics of constraint, and really, move away from perhaps, the modus operandi of the last century around, spectacle and novelty, and kind of, in a sense, establish a new form of sort of consumerism, a rugged consumerism that kind of looks to things that are around us and says, okay, well, what can I do with this? How can I modify it to make it work for me, as opposed to just think I need to work from a sort of tabula rasa state. So I think, it's kind of an abstract point, but I think people getting comfortable with constraints as opposed to sort of considering them as barriers to being creative, I think is just fundamental to the development of like ideas about sustainability and design.
Because the constraints also create a sense of community, if they're executed well. Is that what you mean?
Yes, yeah, exactly. Yeah, and I think it's part of that kind of like engendering and fostering sort of collective modes of existence as well. That these are things that we should tackle together and we should be discussing together.
Yeah, that's a really very interesting point. I mean, it strikes me that in our culture today, we're so atomized. We're sucked into our phones, which draw us into these virtual communities, of course, but in our embodied lives, we are alone. And culture plays this sort of really quite important role, at least when we could actually meet in person, right? You could go to an exhibition, the cinema, you could go to a lecture theater, and you would be sort of joining together in this common endeavor, being reminded that you live in a society together. And that's a really interesting thing, right? It can remind us, going to Memory Palace, seeing Urban Sun, going to one of your talks, Ed, that we have this future that we really need to think about much more about how to protect.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I strongly believe that maybe there's not a lack of money or technology in this world, but a lack of imagination, how we want that future world to look like, and maybe that's what I love working in the Middle East versus Europe. And I'm going to generalize a bit, forgive me, but it's interesting when I present new projects in Europe, usually the commissioner or the clients ask, are you sure you've done it before? Risk management. But when I present in Middle East, like Dubai, Abu Dhabi, they usually ask, are you sure this is the first time? And it does say something about the perception, the perspective, how they look at life and reality. And maybe that is even more important than all the other things. It starts there. How do you see life? How do you feel a part of life? Is it restrictive or is it exploring?
Well, I think also related to this, we know now that sort of in a sense raising awareness isn't enough. We've over the last 25 years we've wrought much more damage on the environment, having known about since the IPCC was set up, or since Al Gore first published his first books and things. It's not knowing the facts in a way is not enough of a motivation, I think, for systemic change. And so I think the role of culture is to, in a sense, reframe and reformulate those facts into both things that are digestible, but things that then generate a sense of community and desire collectively to kind of deal with these issues.
I think on another point, to go back to what you were saying, Charlie, about kind of government versus, I suppose, culture and people within societies. Governments are always having to appeal to the past. We're always looking. It's kind of transgressive. These. In the case of agriculture, like subsidies are a really good example. Like we've set up these systems, these financial models within the farming sphere that kind of mean that we have to rely on them right now. But what culture can do is it can the people within culture, they can put out these more radical ideas, and they can put out these, it's kind of like shifting the Overton window in a little bit, right? So it's like we put out these radical ideas and we get people used to what the future should look like. And we get people used to the idea of what the future can become. And then the government is given a much easier task of implementing these changes. But culture has to adopt the idea that these changes are something that we want. And so I think that's what people, it's not just about raising awareness, but seeing people being active and vocal. What that does is it normalizes these ideas. And so these ideas are not tangible yet, or at least many of them aren't tangible. We can't go out into the world and see them like we'd like to, but they're ideas that exist within our head, and so they become normalized and no longer exist so much on the fringes. And therefore, we don't have to rely on governments taking those first steps, which can seem extreme to them, but we can lay the groundwork for that.
Yeah. And I agree, because listening to you, I just want to have a hamster and talk with it. So yeah, like what we do, we try to make things that people want to be connected with, want to feel connected with, and that overcomes the obvious obstacles we are all facing. I think we're not naive about that. We're not living in our bubble. We're not dreamers somewhere on an attic hidden from reality. No, we're activators. We're happy infiltrators. Trying to improve. Yeah.
I was just going to add, I think also related to this idea of community and to Dan's point about sort of the temporality of sustainability and thinking about the future. I think fundamentally our ideas around what community is has to evolve as well. It's not just about people that are all the rights of people that are kind of on the earth at the moment, right? We really need to find strategies and mechanisms to kind of accommodate the rights of future generations, and so I think pieces of culture, pieces of artwork, the things designers make, for that to sort of be an invitation to consider not just modes of existence in London or Europe, but across the world, but then further, a community which really is truly democratic and inclusive and tries to acknowledge that we can't consistently keep delaying and offsetting responsibility for these issues to people further down the road, is, I think, also important evolution in what we consider community to be.
Yeah, I feel more and more that we all have a right for a better world. We have a right for clean air. We have a right for non-cruel food. But we also have a role in it, right? So there are rights and roles. And I think the more we're aware of that, right? Because I have a right. Yeah, you do, but you also have a role, right? It goes two ways. It takes two to tango. And I think the more we realize that we're not just consumers, but we're makers. We make decisions, we make choices, we make proposals. As Buckminster Fuller once famously said, on spaceship Earth, there are no passengers. We are all crew, right? I think that mentality is getting more and more traction in our community and yours as well. And so if you want to design a city or food or clothes or anything basically, or a system, I think you need to include that to be future proof. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's really interesting. People, as you say, Dan, they have rights. They also have responsibilities and they have agency. They can work towards the future that they envision. Clearly, we're not just individuals. We're part of systems, and we need systemic change. But I think we tend to forget, as an individual, you can push things forward as well.
Oh yeah, that's why I create. You know, there's the we in it. I do it for the idea that I improve humanity, but there's also a me in it. I do it, you know, to make sense of my world. I'm so confused. Traffic jams, COVID, air pollution. I'm so confused about my world. So I create to sort of at least, you know, try to make sense of it on a small scale, on a large scale. That is the beauty of creation. And you can do that by planting a tree in your garden, or taking care of an animal, like Ed just said, or thinking about your Expo Dubai in a more circular way, like as Devlin was mentioning at the studio. Yeah, and it's also, and I just want to mention it, it's also more fun. It's just more fun. It is really more fun. That's also really important. Yeah, it's not just numbers. Yeah.
You were talking earlier, Dan, about the way in which different cultures respond differently to your work. And I think that's a really interesting thing. Ed, I wonder, you know, there are different cultures with different values and norms, different attitudes to eating meat or consuming animal products. Do you find that your message kind of transcends those cultural differences, or do you have to think about how you tailor your messages?
Yeah, that's a really, really, really good question. I think it varies. I mean, when we talk about culture and identity, I think food and also clothing are such core aspects of that. You know, when I speak to people, one of their often biggest fears about veganism is, oh, I won't be able to enjoy this cultural dinner, or, you know, oh, my nan always made me this food when I went around to her house and I won't be able to share that. So, you know, food transcends just being about nutrition. It's about community, it's about relationships, it's about family. There's so much around food basically. And so when we're talking about veganism and changing diets, I think part of the reason why it can be so difficult is because we're not just saying, hey, swap this burger for this burger. We're not, it's something that has more meaning than that often, right? And so obviously around the world, you know, people are very proud of their cultures, and because food plays a part in that, it's always very difficult to know how to acknowledge and how to engage with different people when that is such a core aspect. And I think the important thing is we all share the same values, in the sense of we all want to live in a better world, right? That's something that transcends these kind of like myopic cultural aspects. We all want to live in a world that's more peaceful, more compassionate, and ultimately a planet that we can all live on in the future. And so the core aspects of veganism, I think, transcend these kind of more myopic issues related to culture, because it touches on things that we all really care about, and the values of which, you know, are bigger in importance to us than these cultural aspects. I think the flip side to that as well is about education and showing people, especially as with the things I discussed earlier, like cell cultured meat and such, we don't have to give anything up. And I think it's just about redefining tradition, redefining cultures, and adapting. It's something we've always done as a species. We look at cultural and traditional practices in the past, and we think, well, thankfully, we got rid of those cultural and traditional practices because we recognize that the morality and the ethics behind those practices were more important than what those practices actually represented to culture at that time. And so I think it's about showing people that we can live in a world that's plant-based, that has these technological advancements when it comes to agriculture, and it doesn't impact our personal identity or our cultural identity. And so I think it's about easing that message into people's mindsets, and showing that this isn't a radically changed world. It's an improved world where we've harnessed our values and harnessed the technological advancements that exist right there in front of us.
Yeah, I agree. It's not a copy paste world, but a copy morph or copy more world. And for me, it's very simple. I think we live in a world where creativity is our true capital. As tech is taking a lot of our jobs, or the taxi driver, etc. So we need to invest in creativity. So culture, we're talking about culture. It's not just about decorating or a beautiful painting in the great Louvre by Jean Nouvel, also, and it is great, but it's also indeed about sort of showing what is possible and why it is important that we're in this change that I think you very eloquently just described. So culture and creativity is part of the activation, not just of the decoration, personally for me.
And I think further to your point, Ed, you know, I think there's an interesting point there about how strong cultures are, right? They're not brittle. Just because you stop eating meat at a kind of traditional family meal, it doesn't mean that you destroy that tradition. It can adapt.
Well, I think part of the reason why traditions and cultures are so important to us, you know, cultural practices are so important to us, is not the specific practice or the specific tradition. I mean, Christmas is a great example. We think about eating turkey at Christmas, but it's not the turkey at Christmas that is meaningful. It's the unity, it's the community, it's being with loved ones. And so I think it's about showing how many of these traditional practices and these cultural practices, it's not about the specific details of that practice, but more about the larger, broader aspects of what it covers. And that is so often about, you know, dance, about music. It's about those things that make us so intrinsically human, those relationships we have with other humans. And so if we can reshape our ideas and mentalities around what traditions really mean, we can still celebrate Christmas or celebrate the, you know, the holidays that we celebrate in the places where we live.
You know, I had a dream about that last night for New Year's Eve. Fireworks, traditional fireworks is noisy, bad for animals, a bit polluting. The drones are a bit ugly and aggressive. So I dreamt that in the New Year's Eve, there's already fireworks every night. The stars, 300,000 kilometers per second. The light is speeding towards us. What if in the New Year's Eve this year, we would shut down all the street lights for 10 minutes, everything. So we celebrate the darkness and we celebrate the sky, we celebrate the stars. Why not? Yeah, it's just my 2 cents, sorry.
Well, I hope that by the next New Year's Eve, travel will be possible and I will be able to visit you in Rotterdam, Dan. I would love to see that. Unfortunately, this session is drawing to a close, but it has been such a delight speaking with you all about this really important issue. I certainly feel that I've left this with a kind of tremendous hope about the future. And I have to say, I wasn't expecting to leave this session with that emotion, but I've really been sort of left with the sense of just the kind of remarkable, distinct power of art and culture, you know, design, what you guys do to help us reimagine the future in a way that can be hopeful, despite the incredibly worrying prospect that we kind of face with climate change getting worse every day. So thank you all so very much, Dan, Matteo.
Thank you, Charlie.
It's been a real
Thank you, Charlie. That was
great.
great.
Very much. Yeah, it was a lot of fun. Thanks for having us.
Thank you all.
Yeah. Thanks, Ed.
Thanks, Dan. Thanks, Matteo.
Thanks, Dan. Thanks, Ed.
Matteo.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Ed, are we still live? Yeah. Is Ed still there?
Yep, still here. Still live, I think.
Can I see the hamster?
Oh, no, he's dead. Oh, no. I know,
no.
he died years ago. This was.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No.
Sorry, I'm glad.
No.
I'm glad I didn't ask this in public. Sorry.
Oh, it's fine. It's fine. No, he died. He'd lived a long life. I think he was over 3 years, and but yeah, he passed away a couple of years ago now. Yeah, unfortunately so.
Happy hamster. But I like these kind of sessions because we don't know each other, right? But by just having a conversation, you know, you create a mindset, I think. And Charlie, you handled us really well. We're not easy persons. But it was really good. Yeah, thank you.
That's very kind of you to say. I think we are still live.
I think we're still live. Yeah. Okay. Oh, decent question. Yeah. I'm okay.
Good thing we didn't say
I have
anything
one
more
more minute.
embarrassing.
No.
Any closing remarks from anyone? Ed, when are you getting the next hamster? Surely there's a replacement.
Oh, that would be nice, wouldn't it? Maybe because obviously normally I'd be traveling and doing lots of speaking and touring and such. So hopefully in the future I can settle down and have a little furry friend.
Very good. Yeah.
Yeah.
And say hi to Ez for me.
Of course, yeah. She sent it over.
Yeah. No, it's really good. Okay, I gotta run. If you're ever in Rotterdam, let us know, and otherwise we'll see you in Abu Dhabi.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Take care, everyone.